Very welcome to all of you. This is a very special moment. We are celebrating the 10th edition of the Youth and Leaders Summit. And let me tell you, as I was checking on the website, I realized that I was one of the speakers at the inaugural session back in 2016. So this is where I want to start. The theme in 2016 was what agenda for the incoming Secretary General of the United Nations. We were in the process of electing a new Secretary General for the United Nations. It ended up being Antonio Guterres, and the first edition was devoted to what should his agenda be. This was 2015 when the UN had concluded the Sustainable Development Goals. The world came together to agree on a set of objectives to end extreme poverty and advance collective, peaceful, and sustainable progress through international cooperation. And I quote what these SDGs were about: a shared blueprint for peace and prosperity for people and planet now and into the future. This was 2015. 2015 was also the Paris Climate Agreement. It was a little bit before that the OECD, with the G20, had started a project called Base Erosion and Profit Shifting to provide an international framework to combat tax avoidance by multinationals. And it was also then that WTO members had reached an agreement to cut red tape at customs, an agreement on trade facilitation. The sentiment at that time was one of coming together, some form of high watermark in international cooperation. Not that there were no conflicts. We had, Russia had invaded Crimea. ISIS was advancing in Iraq. A Saudi-led coalition started a military intervention in Yemen. Al-Shabaab killed dozens of students in Garissa, Kenya. Russia bombed anti-government forces in Syria. This was also 2015. Check this out. 2015 was the year when OpenAI was founded. And it was the year when SpaceX landed the first uncrewed reusable rocket. 2015. 10 years later, the world has changed a lot. Enlightened self-interest cooperation is giving way to zero-sum nationalism, included on systemic risks to humanity, such as climate change or pandemics. Systemic rivalry between the US and China, and geopolitics is back with a vengeance, risking to fracture the world. Violations of international law are routinely couched as national security needs. Trust in institutions is at an all-time low, with fears and polarization giving way to grievances, and with violence now being increasingly accepted as the response. AI has shown an incredible potential so far, with greater competition than cooperation. And the space has become the next dimension of the global economic and geopolitical competition. We've got open conflicts today in Ukraine, in the Middle East, in Sudan, in the Democratic Republic of Congo, and nuclear proliferation in Iran or North Korea speaks volumes of the failure to prevent and to resolve conflicts. But in the middle of this turbulence, there is also incredible hope. Hope in scientific progress, hope in trade agreements being concluded across the world, hope in a global digital compact adopted by all members of the United Nations last September, hope in an AI summit that will take place in 2 weeks, hope in tenuous ceasefires in Lebanon and Gaza, These are also many of the examples where cooperation and understanding is working. But all of this is the backdrop to the question we ask in this 10th edition of the summit. What future for international cooperation? It's a question that we want to explore not only in the summit, but throughout the semester, but where we want to start now. So let me give you a word about the program. The program will start with looking at financing for development. We've got 5 years to go to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals, and we need to make sure that everyone has the financing they need in order to get there, especially ahead of the UN Conference on Financing for Development taking place in Seville in July. We will hear from Disa Gironet tomorrow about how each one of us can lead institutions with compassion. At the end of the day, humanity is the bedrock of international cooperation. We will discuss the future of the international trading system with the Director General of the World Trade Organization, Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala. We will debate whether it's worth keeping the UN or not. We'll do that tomorrow, and we'll have two teams fighting their corner. We will hear from the Secretary General of Amnesty International, Agnès Calamar, on how nations can work together to protect and promote human rights. We will examine a new world order and the future of multilateralism in a session chaired by a former president of the General Assembly, Book Jeremic. All these conversations will be the starter, and we will continue in the following weeks with more on AI next week, Friday, ahead of the Paris Summit, with cooperation on food, with cooperation on nuclear security, and with cooperation on climate change. At the end of the day is also the 10th agreement, the 10th anniversary of the Paris Agreement. To stay committed to experimenting new tools, in this edition, we will test a new technology that will help us enhance democratic decision-making processes. You will be invited to engage with police, to do online voting, to express your views, and your views will form the basis for the intergenerational dialogue that we will have on Friday. Now, we've had to change the order of interventions. There was going to be Luis Vassy, our director, that was going to start us off. So let me now pass the floor on to Luis Vassy to start us off before I return to give the floor to our first speaker, the one that will kick us off in a moment. Luis.
So, I'm going to start this week with my most French moment, which is to arrive late at my own party. I'm really sorry for that, but I will tell you in 1 minute why I was late, and it was for a very good reason that in fact resonates with the reasons or the reason why you're gathered here. First of all, of course, welcome to Sciences Po. I'm Luis Vassy, the president of this institution, and I would like really to start, first of all, by thanking you for being here, all of you, but specifically, obviously, the Secretary General of the OECD, Mathias Cormann, and, of course, Arancha, that has been working with her teams for the success of this 10th edition of the annual Youth and Leaders Summit. Welcome to all of you, specifically in the Amphi Boot Me, and also hello to everyone who is following the live stream. Maybe just a couple of words on BootMe and the reasons why this figure is important to Sciences Po, not only because he was the founder of the school, but because in fact this school was created at this very specific moment that has a lot to do with the topics, or some of the topics that you will be dealing with in the next few days. In fact, this school was created 150 years ago, in a very specific context, which was the context of the defeat of France against Prussia in 1871. And so the question that was that the very new French Republic, the third one, but the newest version of it at the time, was confronted with was a very simple question. Is a democratic system efficient enough to face its autocratic rivals? And in essence, I guess to some extent, or to a very large extent, this resonates with the challenges that we are faced with today. And I'm really proud that Sciences Po continues exploring through its intellectual journey this very core question of our ability as democratic societies to overcome the very real challenges that we are currently faced with. Every year, the Youth and Leaders Summit brings together some of the world's most influential leaders to engage in dialogue with those who aspire to follow their footsteps, our students, and this year, of course, in a very special occasion, which is the celebration of the 10th anniversary of this wonderful initiative. These dialogues between contemporary leaders and those who will soon be working with them, and later, but don't hurry though, take over from them, is of course extremely valuable for our students. It's a chance for them to take effective ownership of the issues they study, in fact, on a daily basis in the classroom. I'm also convinced that these exchanges have a great deal to offer to the leaders that we invite here. Meeting young people from around the world, they get necessarily to encounter new visions of society, new ways of thinking, and new ambitions. The different sessions with prestigious speakers, and their formidable knowledge and experience of the core themes of this summit is a clear testament of the interest international decision makers show in Sciences Po and, above all, in our students. And I have to tell you that coming back from a week-long trip in Asia, in India, in Singapore, in Taiwan, I see how much Sciences Po is actually very much appreciated and valued for the intellectual and academic input that it gives to students. And I have to say that since we are right now working on the admission process for the next semester, the initial figures I've been given by the teams here of admissions are incredible. So we are on track for a 30% increase of applications on a year-to-year basis, mainly driven, I have to say, by Asia and North America. And I think that says a lot about our attractivity and the validity of what we do here from an intellectual standpoint. This year's edition raises a very legitimate question. Arancha just recalled that. What future for international cooperation? And as you know, this topic is very close to my heart because I, like Arancha, though at a more modest level, I've been in diplomacy for 20 years, and of course that's something that has been one of the dominant elements of my professional life, seeing if we are able to solve common challenges through cooperation. The challenges are known. We live in a very volatile and, in fact, brutal moment, it's clear. But since we are here in an intellectual and academic institution, we also can find some hope or some interest, at least in these times. I would like to quote Raymond Aron, a French thinker in international theory, philosopher, sociologist, historian that is also very important in my own intellectual development. And he starts actually his book, Peace and War Among Nations, with a very simple sentence. Times of trouble call for meditation, and I think, in fact, you will have lots to meditate about in the next few weeks. Sciences Po has indeed a role to play in this time of tumults. We have much to contribute to France, to Europe, and to the world. This was true yesterday, and it remains true today. I would like to say that for us, Already today, but certainly even more in the future, we'll have to work on four major, or five, in fact, five major ruptures that your generation will be confronted with. Of course, the democratic challenge, it's been evoked by Arancha, disinformation, rise of populism, that raised the question of our ability to solve issues through peaceful means within our societies rather than through authoritarian means. And for that, I think it's important, that's the point I made about MUTMI, that we are able to find ways for democracies to be also not only deliberative, but also efficient, find solutions, be the place where on the long term societies are able to develop concrete and pragmatic solutions. Of course, there is a challenge of international conflictuality. It's been evoked by Arancha, so I don't need to go back to that. We see day by day, in fact, and it's pretty striking how much in only 1 week this tension that was already, of course, huge. We know a war in the Middle East, war in Ukraine, tensions in Asia, and now for Europeans, the possibility of having the leader of their own military alliance becoming more, how can I put it, more aggressive in the defense or promotion of its interests. And of course, there is the climate rupture, the climate crisis. So I was late because, in fact, I was with a very prominent group of people that we have gathered to be the members of the prefiguration team of the climate school that we intend to open here at Sciences Po by 2026. We need to be the place where, through social sciences, we also look into ways of handling transitions and developing the professional and intellectual competencies that will be useful for your generation to be active participants in tackling the climate crisis. We see the backlash. It is there, but there are two impasses in a way that we need to avoid. The impasse of desperation and simply say, well, the backlash is too strong, so we stop looking into ecological transition and climate issues. That's nonsense. 2024 was the year where we met where we attained the 1.5 degrees above historical trends, and so that is in fact in the picture, and the issue will be there. But there is also another impasse, which would be to simply not acknowledge that there is economic, social, political, international challenges to be dealt with when it comes to making these transitions possible. So we want this place also to be a place where we look into solutions from a humanities and social sciences standpoint. And I have to say that after the exchange that I just had with colleagues from all over the world, I'm pretty optimistic about our ability to become one of the leaders in that field. And of course, we have the scientific and technological ruptures. You are at the forefront of that, and we need also from here to address these issues from an intellectual standpoint. But ruptures seems negative. If you look at it from a positive side, it's also for each rupture, there is a challenge of sustainability that we need to look into. Sustainability of democratic systems, sustainability of the international scene, sustainability, of course, of our climate, planet, environment, and sustainability of these technological transitions that we are faced with. All these questions, of course, need to be handled through international cooperation, and that's the key question that you'll be looking into these last few in the next few days. I'm of course I look forward to hearing from the nature and the quality of the debates that you'll have here. In any case, I think that the fact that we've been able to organize these debates from here with the support of the New York Times, with the support of CMA, CGM from the corporate world, indicates how much we are legitimate to position ourselves at the center of these debates. Again, I would like to specifically thank Arancha, the PSIA teams that have been working on this event that is already successful from what I see here in Amphibutmi, and that I'm sure will be thrilling in the next few few days. With that, and with my apologies for having arrived 8 minutes late, I would like to wish you an excellent summit and thank you for your patience and welcome to Sciences Po. Have a great few days.
Thank you very, very much, Louise. Let me now call on stage Max Cocard, is the PSIA student that will do the introduction of our guest of honor. And I want to ask you for a big applause to our guest of honor, the one that will open the 10th edition of the Youth and Leaders Summit, the Secretary General of the OECD, Mathias Cormann. Mathias.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you to all leaders and Sciences Po students for being present today. I'm delighted to introduce our first keynote speech about strengthening international cooperation to address shared global challenges. In 2015, as Sciences Po was preparing the first edition of the Youth and Leaders Summit, I was 12 years old. Fast forward to 2025, and I just turned 22, right in time for the 10th edition of the summit. In 2015, the Paris Climate Agreement came into existence. Fast forward to 2025, and it is plus 1.5 degrees outside. In 2015, the United Nations adopted 17 Sustainable Development Goals. Fast forward to 2025, and only 1/5 are on track to be met. So what happened? Yes, I've grown up, but our most pressing shared global challenges persist and have even worsened over the past decade. Did we collectively lose faith in our ambitions? Were we never truly committed to them in the first place? Has the world become too divided for the necessary international cooperation to exist? Please reassure me and raise your hands if you believe that we need to achieve the objectives set forth by the Paris Climate Agreement and the Sustainable Development Goals. Good. I see that we have a strong majority in the room. I see that future leaders care, but I also see that current leaders care. Now, if I asked you again, how do we finance the climate transition and who should pay for it? How do we respond to the economic, fiscal, and social impacts of population aging? And how should we approach the rapidly evolving challenges posed by artificial intelligence? I'm sure you would all come up with different answers. And that's why we'll have polls, where you can all vote. During my time at Sciences Po, I've had the immense privilege of meeting young students from all over the world. Together, we have put in late hours of work for group projects, presentations, and associations. One thing I will never forget is the priceless potential of international collaboration, which I hope future leaders present today value as well. This is also what the OECD promotes through its Better Policies for Better Lives. By standing for the rule of law, human rights, open markets, and cultural diversity, to name just a few, it serves as a global forum for countries to exchange and search for innovative solutions. Without further ado, I am pleased to introduce Mr. Mathias Cormann. As the current Secretary General of the OECD, he works closely on promoting sustainable economic growth, advancing global climate action, as well as fostering well-functioning global markets. Between 2013 and 2020, he also served as Australia's Minister for Finance. Through his experiences, he will be able to help us better understand some of the most urgent questions regarding population aging, climate action, artificial intelligence, and the role of the youth. Please join me in giving, again, a warm round of applause for our keynote speaker, the OECD Secretary General, Mathias Cormann.
Well, thank you very much for that introduction, and thank you so much for the invitation to talk to you about the future for international cooperation. Now, let me say a couple of things right up front. Firstly, I very much believe in a positive future for international cooperation. International cooperation is hard, Multilateralism is hard. It can be frustratingly slow. There'll be setbacks along the way. It seems so obvious where we need to go. But, in the end, international cooperation, by definition, involves nation states with national governments responsible to their national populations with different economic, social, political, security, interests, histories, values, perspectives. There are big countries, small countries, all sorts of challenges. They're very practical challenges where even with the best level of goodwill, the sort of bureaucracy involved in coordinating some of the technical work can make finding the swift and efficient compromises very complicated, more complicated than we would like. And even when agreements have been reached, how do we make sure that countries actually follow through on the things that they've committed to and that ultimately the collective outcomes we all want to see achieved are not being achieved or not being achieved as quickly as we would like. But what is the alternative other than to keep trying, to keep doing our best, to keep throwing everything at it to make the best possible progress? And sometimes, when we look at where we are right now and we try and think ahead about all of the challenges in front of us, all of the challenges for the world, all of the political dynamics that play in the short term, the conflicts, the wars, the impacts of election outcomes in different parts of the world, like we might think like we're never going to get to where we need to be. But trust me, it's not true. Like it can be a marathon, it can be hard, but over the medium to long run, eventually we get there. And just by way of case study, and I'm painfully conscious of the fact that most of you are born after 2000. That's sort of quite recent. And I was born in 1970. I was actually born in the German-speaking part of Belgium, a very small part on the border of Belgium and Germany, which was quite impacted by the Second World War. Now, I now lead an organization, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, which actually was first established as the Organization for European Economic Cooperation, and fundamentally as the organization that administered US and Canadian aid for the reconstruction of Europe. Now, in this room, how many of you are from a European country outside France? Quite a lot. So how many of you from a European country have worked in a European country other than your own? Quite a lot of you. Well, let me tell you, like back in 1945, there were borders between nation states in Europe. Businesses weren't able to trade across borders. There were import restrictions. There were currency controls. You weren't able to freely change your currency as you went across borders. You weren't able to just move from one country to the next to go and study or work. There were discriminatory trade practices. There were also, and I mean, countries in Europe, every couple of decades, were at war with each other. One of the conditions that the US Secretary of State at the time, George Marshall, imposed as part of the US aid towards the reconstruction of Europe was to enforce a requirement that the countries of Europe that had been at war with each other needed to now work together, needed to cooperate. It was really the start of driving international cooperation in Europe, which ultimately led to the common market, led to the free movement of people and goods and services across European borders. And I mean, quite frankly, the economic development and the increases in incomes and living standards that have happened across Europe in that period, and a period of 7 to 8 decades of peace and stability in Europe, where in the past there had been wars, until Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine. The level of international cooperation that was facilitated through the establishment of the Organization for European Economic Cooperation and Development solved some real problems by encouraging an increased and improved international cooperation among nation states in Europe. Now, I know that we now no longer look at Europe as a collective of nation states, but back in 1945, believe it or not, that's what it was. And the only future that we can predict with any sort of certainty is the future that people looked at in the past. The future that we are looking at from where we are now is a future that we are yet to shape. And we need everyone, we need well-qualified, well-intentioned people of goodwill to make it the best possible future in whatever area that they have responsibility and are able to make a contribution. Now, why is it so difficult to bring countries together and just do what is so seemingly obvious? Well, often politics can get in the way. Different countries with different governments of different political persuasions can find it difficult to find compromise. And I guess what we are trying to do at the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, and what had been proven to be successful in the post-Second World War period, is to try and take some of the politics out of the conversations in trying to advance the level of international cooperation on issues that were identified as issues of shared interest, of shared challenge, of shared opportunity. And so at the OECD, we're an organization that now brings together 38 countries from around the world, still 26 out of Europe, 12 in other parts of the world. But they're all market-based democracies. They're all countries that share a commitment to democracy, to human rights, the rule of law, market-based economic principles, and to the development of better policies for better lives, to the development of policies to help improve economic and social well-being, and we provide advice across the broad spectrum of economic, social, and environmental policy. But the methodologies that we use have proven to be somewhat effective in helping to take decisions forward. We collect data. We collect comparative data about the impact of different policy choices, about different policy approaches, and presenting and reporting comparative data and pointing to the evidence facilitates international dialogue, facilitates multilateral dialogue, facilitates evidence-based mutual learning, and facilitates evidence-based advice on policy best practice. And we also have, at the OECD, we provide a platform to bring countries together to discuss shared challenges in the best possible ways to tackle them. Now, that goes across the broad spectrum. You'd be surprised on what areas. I know that when we think international cooperation today, we think, of course, peace and resolving conflicts. We think about climate change. We think about digital transformation. We think about trade. But international cooperation is important across so many different policy areas. Believe it or not, but we facilitate international cooperation in relation to seeds standards, chemical standards, in relation to all sorts of very specific technical issues. And of course, one of the issues that the OECD is quite famous for is that over the last 15 years, we've sought to facilitate improved international cooperation to make our international tax arrangements fairer and work better. And that's been in the news again in recent times, and I'm happy to talk about that some more during the discussion. But in a globalized world, in a digitalized world, there are new opportunities and there are new risks, including when it comes to taxation. If you are an internationally operating multinational business that sells products and services in countries all around the world, you will interact with tax systems of sovereign countries all around the world. And if there is no effective international cooperation, the risk is that businesses will end up being double taxed or multiple times taxed on their incomes, or not to be taxed at all. Neither of them are fair outcomes, and neither of them are outcomes that would be conducive to efficient and effective economic development and growth. So the OECD for some time has been involved in bringing countries together to seek to reform international tax arrangements in a way to make them fairer and work better in a globalized, digitalized world economy. But as the world becomes more digitalized, there are more risks and more threats when it comes to tax avoidance, but there's also better capacity to work together to ensure that people pay their fair share of tax. So, I mean, for example, we now facilitate the automatic exchange of tax information. We drove the abolition of bank secrecy. There is regular country-by-country reporting. I mean, in the past, it would have been much harder to share information across 190 odd jurisdictions in the way that we can do today. And so it would have been much easier for businesses to be able to avoid tax, which then, of course, means less money available to invest in public goods, essential public services, infrastructure, and the like. But there is always this tension, and there is a tension that is playing out now in conversations that we're having now. Why should an individual nation state take any notice of what is negotiated at an international level? Why should any individual country pay any attention to what is agreed at a multilateral level? Well, in the end, because that is the only way that you can come up with a fair and equitable system that facilitates, that provides stability and certainty, and that helps facilitate continued trade and investment exchanges in a way that is ultimately delivering benefits for people around the world. On climate, Paris Agreement. The good news is, so 2015, the Paris Agreement was signed. By latest count, more than 150 countries around the world had committed themselves to achieving carbon neutrality. Most of them by 2050, some of them by 2053 or 2060 or 2070, but most of them by 2050. There's an argument fundamentally around how that is best achieved. And again, this is where different interests and different economic and social circumstances can come in, stages of development, stages of, in terms of the stage of development the country is in. And the Paris Agreement, because in the end, international agreements try to be as forward-leaning and as ambitious as possible, but also as pragmatic and realistic as necessary in order to cut a deal. The Paris Agreement is a so-called bottom-up approach, which recognizes that different countries around the world will pursue their own approaches to the way they tackle climate change. But climate change is a global challenge. How do you solve a global challenge if you don't have a proper, coherent, coordinated, agreed international framework where we ensure that emissions reduction efforts in one jurisdiction actually help reduce global emissions and don't just shift emissions to other parts of the world where for the same level of economic output, emissions are going to be higher. Means your economy is worse off, the climate is worse off, doesn't make a lot of sense. So how do you ensure and how do you facilitate the sorts of conversations and the sorts of efforts of countries working together so that we can optimize the global emissions reduction impacts and benefits of individual jurisdictional efforts in countries around the world, and that is one of the areas that the OECD is very much involved in through our inclusive forum on carbon mitigation approaches, and that is a forum where we seek to bring together countries from around the world, accepting, as the Paris Agreement does, that different countries will use different approaches, but we track the application of individual measures. We work to assess their comparative effectiveness, and we work to develop and provide the data to help inform ultimately best practice policy advice and hopefully help inform better decisions by governments around the world, but also to provide a basis for multilateral dialogue inside that forum to help facilitate the sorts of conversations between national governments that should, over time, help deliver better international outcomes. Now, not easy because different countries with, as I say, depending on whether you're an advanced, an emerging or developing economy, on different aspects of this global conversation, you will take different perspectives, and these conversations can be very robust. But in the end, we've got to minimize negative cross-border spillover effects of different approaches in individual nation states, and we've got to optimize positive cross-border spillovers of initiatives in different nation states, for example, through the more rapid diffusion of technology, of innovation, sharing best practices and making sure that they're adopted as widely as possible all around the world. On AI, AI, The OECD was the first international organization that established an international standard on artificial intelligence to help facilitate the safe and trustworthy and responsible and human-centric development of AI in a way that is consistent with our democratic values as an international organization. Incidentally, that was a standard that was first established back in 2019 during the period of the first Trump administration. I just say that in the context that international cooperation was very much possible then on some key issues, and we will of course work with all of our member states to optimize and the outcomes when it comes to international cooperation on key issues now. And indeed, I mean, we've updated that standard in 2024 to take into account developments around generative AI and the like. But the challenge moving forward is to ensure that this exciting technology, which has got many great upside benefits for humanity, is developed in a way that doesn't create new and destructive divides between countries, within countries, that is developed in a way where there can be a universal access and universal opportunity, but also in a way that is globally coherent and where we don't have, through the development of different standards and uncoordinated standards, essentially risks of new frictions and new challenges that are entirely avoidable when it comes to the development of the global economy for the benefit of all. In relation to trade, there's a big conversation now, of course, about the value of trade and whether the world should decouple, fragment. I mean, when you look back over the last several decades, moves through GATT and then ultimately the World Trade Organization, moves towards liberalizing trade around the world fundamentally have been positive for the global economy. They have helped lift hundreds and hundreds of millions of people out of poverty. The truth is that if we want to achieve stronger, more equitable, sustainable development for people all around the world, we need to connect more people to global markets and supply chains, and we need to work to keep markets open around a set of rules that everybody can agree with and that everybody can work with. But ultimately, it requires international cooperation, it requires international agreement to the rules, and it requires international agreement to the application of the rules whenever there is a conflict. And I mean, these are all areas in which the OECD has and will continue to play a role. But I mean, I guess my most important message is international cooperation is challenging. It will always be challenging. It has been challenging in the past, and we have been, as humanity, in human history, we have been in very challenging situations in the past. But people of goodwill and commitment have come together and have found solutions, have found better ways forward that have delivered real, tangible improvements when it comes to the quality of life of people and when it comes to tackling some of the challenges that people faced at that time. We are facing a whole range of challenges that are the challenges of our time. We can't tackle them without effective international cooperation. So the only option is to find the way to make international cooperation effective, to make it work. There is no option of turning to the side or putting our head under the doona. We've got to keep working, we've got to keep going past any disappointment that might happen over the short term and focus on the long term. Now, at the OECD, compared to other international organizations, and I know I could see that you have a little provocative question to consider in the next few days on whether or not we still need the UN. And let me just give you my perspective right from the word go. Yes, of course we still need the UN. I mean, is the UN perfect? No. I mean, is there opportunity for improvement? Yes, and I'm sure that you will have conversations about how the UN could be reformed and improved. But in the end, we do need those sorts of platforms for dialogue, for exchange, to give ourselves the best possible chance at peace and stability, and even when there's setbacks, to go back in, to deal with international challenges and crises, from pandemics to climate change. We need to have these forums where we can bring countries from around the world together to keep talking, and even when we don't always land the result we want, and particularly when we don't land the result we want straight away, to keep talking. And I guess in that context, international cooperation is always hard, but it's perhaps, and I wouldn't say it's easy at the OECD either, but I guess the larger the group of countries that is involved and the more diverse the group of countries that is involved, the harder it gets. I mean, at the OECD we have 38 countries, but they're all market-based democracies, and there is a level of like-mindedness that, while there is a diversity of perspectives and interests on specific issues, overall there's a commitment. There's a very strong commitment to try and find solutions together. When you end up in organizations like the World Trade Organization or the United Nations, WTO 166 countries, UN 193 countries, and some observers, it gets harder because the diversity of perspectives and the sheer number of countries involved makes it harder, but it doesn't make it less important. It is always important to keep talking and to keep trying to find the best possible way forward. And I am confident that many of you in this room will apply positive and constructive roles when it comes to that, given the academic institution you are attending, and given the commitment that you've already demonstrated by being here and by participating in this course. I mean, having just been in the green room, I think that's what it was, and looking at the essay of François Mitterrand in 1937 at this institution about the relations between France and Germany between 1878 and 1887. Very long time ago, but he became the president of France, and he played a real role in building a strong French-German axis at a time when that wasn't self-evident. I mean, the strong French-German axis that was built in that post-Second World War period was not at all self-evident. It took people of courage, of real strength and character to have the vision and the commitment and the energy and the persistence and the skill to convince people to go with them. And I mean, I guess that this is the final point. I mean, why is it that nation governments sometimes find it hard to do what they need to do in facilitating better international cooperation? It's because in the end, when we talk about populism and nationalism, and in a democracy, it is people who elect their governments. And the only way you avoid having bad decisions by governments is by making sure that the people understand and can see the benefit of what it is that you're trying to do. And that also requires a very important skill in terms of communicating, in terms of engaging, in terms of being candid and really working the issues through in an open and transparent way with your population. Unless, as a government, you can convince your people that what it is that you're trying to do as a government internationally is ultimately in their interest, in the country's interest, then it will be very hard to be successful over the medium to long run. I hope that these were some interesting sort of pointers to get the conversation going. I didn't mean to talk quite that long, but then I'm a politician from way back. But I'm happy to now have a discussion and be guided by you as to where you would like me to focus. But thank you so much for joining us tonight, and thank you for your interest.
Thank you very much, Matthias. And if we take one lesson, is that it's all about endurance. Endurance. Okay, so we've got two mics on both sides of the aisle, as usual. Queue and put your questions to Mathias Cormann. Just briefly telling us who you are and what the question is. So, are we shy today or what? No? All right, I'm going to give you another try. I'm going to put the first question to Mathias. Mathias, you've been, but then I want you to start queuing for the questions. So Mathias, you've been in government, and in a way, you've been a stakeholder of the organization that you now lead. What's the lesson that you take from nation to international that you represent today?
Well, I mean, Australia is an open, globally focused trading economy, and what happens in the world is very important to Australia's ongoing success. But I mean, Australia wasn't always an open, globally focused trading economy. In fact, in the post-Second World War period, the 40s, 50s, 60s, it was very much a protected economy that was quite closed. And Australia joined the OECD in 1971, and the reforms that followed by governments of both political persuasions in Australia subsequently opened the economy up, opened the economy to global competition, and created all sorts of opportunities that led to very strong and quite sustained economic growth over several decades. But Australia is a good global citizen and seeks to be part of the global conversation about how to tackle the challenges of our time today. But for Australia, being a member of the OECD has been unequivocally positive.
So what the Secretary General was telling me is that he gets about 20,000 applications for internships in the OECD.
28,000.
28,000 for 700 positions. I know that you guys are very interested in that. So please make sure you demonstrate that everyone in the OECD should be looking at the Sciences Po CVs, please. We're going to start with you over there.
Okay. Perfect. Hi, my name is Jonathan, and I study international governance and diplomacy at PSIA in the first year. And I have a question. In your speech, you mentioned 2 points that I thought, what do you think is more important? You mentioned on the one hand side that, as the OECD does, you look at data and come up with fact-based, data-based policy solutions. And on the other hand, right in the end, you mentioned how important the role of communication is and telling the people or explaining to the people what the benefit of international cooperation or whatever policy it may be, what the benefit of that is. So I'm wondering, would you say that the facts need to be distributed or explained better to the people, or do you think it's still, or not still, is it narratives that we need to, that need to be communicated and sold? Just the approach towards the people concerning the end of your speech. I thought that was really important.
Well, I mean, we need both. It's the truth of the matter. I mean, often data can speak for itself. And one of the things that we've done since I've been at the OECD, we used to sell our data and our reports. We now provide it to everyone for free. If you go to the OECD website today, you can access all data and information that we hold for free. Like we've moved to open by default, and we hope that is a tangible contribution to help better inform public policy debates on relevant issues. Now, I mean, we collect, report, disseminate data. We, of course, assess that data and come up with, our view as to what it means and what the lessons to draw, and I guess you can call that a narrative. But we also have 26 odd policy committees from, investment to trade to environment to education to health, to competition, I mean, you name it, everything in between. And each of those committees has got experts from countries all around the world, OECD members and partner countries, and they discuss, and this is also facilitating international cooperation. So at the very technical level, they review the data, they assess what it means, and together develop the narrative of how best to move things forward. I mean, when it comes to international tax reform, for example, I mean, we've got this inclusive framework on base erosion and profit shifting, which has the 38 OECD member countries in it, but which also has more than 100 non-OECD member countries in it. There's more than 140 countries from around the world that meet at the OECD or via the OECD, reviewing data, reviewing information, making judgments, bringing national perspectives, but then trying to find a way to bring all of that together into a joint consensus way forward. And I mean, bringing that many countries with that many different perspectives and interests together can be hard. And there's not always just a button that you can press and you've got a neat little narrative. I mean, sometimes it's literally just trying to negotiate the best possible consensus in all of the circumstances.
Thank you.
Thank you. Gentleman over there.
Well, the lines are increasing now, that's good.
My name is Daniel Knott. I'm studying in the first year in the Masters in Environmental Policy. And in your speech, you have both mentioned the increasing political difficulties and the hard time for international cooperation, and especially in Germany and France, which you have mentioned as kind of the engine for European cooperation. We see increasing fractionalization, polarization, yeah. What is your view on how, in this environment, we personally, as now students at Sciences Po, but also within our national environments, with your experience in both national and governance and international organizations, can make a difference?
Be the best you can be at what you do is a good start. I mean, in a democracy, polarization or challenges for government are a symptom of an underlying problem that ultimately can only be addressed over time through proper democratic engagement. And some, I mean, these are not things. I mean, the reason why we are seeing political challenges is because people have gone and have experienced a very challenging period with a level of anxieties around. We've gone through a pandemic. We've had high levels of inflation. We've had, issues around, of course, I mean, wages and other incomes, fixed incomes, not keeping up with the level of inflation. What that means in terms of people's perception of economic security, geopolitical issues, conflicts, wars. I mean, there's a lot going on right now, and there's also a lot going on that is now turbocharged, via social media, and sometimes it has to be said via a level of industrial scale misinformation that sort of seeks to manipulate certain outcomes. But like the way to tackle all of this sustainably is by really robustly engaging in the conversation, and that means we need as many people as possible that are well informed, well intentioned. Whatever your political views doesn't matter, as long as you engage from a foundation of genuine knowledge, expertise, and commitment, and engage openly, candidly, honestly in the public conversation. I mean, in the end, a public consensus will form. But right now, I think it will probably take a bit longer for us to get there, given the level of anxiety that I think is out in the broader community, not just here and not just in France and in Germany. This is happening in countries around the world as a function of where the economic situation is at.
Thank you.
Thank you. Lady over there.
Thank you for being present here today. My name is Shamsia. I'm a second-year master's student. I was curious about the fact that the OECD is looking to grow with increasing and welcoming new members. I was wondering, what do you see as the biggest benefits, and what would you say are maybe some of the biggest challenges, and how do you deal with that?
A very good question, very well-informed question. So, I mean, at the OECD, we are the custodian of a set of economic, social, political values, but also standards and best practices, which we believe, if applied effectively and by governments around the world, help deliver better outcomes for people, higher incomes, better living standards, and countries around. I mean, the most recent big wave of accession was countries in Eastern Europe that transformed into market-based democracies from formerly communist systems, and through the alignment with OECD standards and best practices, they've been able to deliver economic development and growth outcomes that have delivered benefits to their populations. We believe that we can help countries like Argentina, Brazil, Peru, as well as Indonesia, Thailand, and in Europe, Bulgaria, Croatia, and Romania similarly benefit. But also conversely, I mean, we have countries like Indonesia and Thailand, the biggest and second biggest economies in Southeast Asia, in the accession process with the OECD. It means that they're now represented around the table in our committees and working groups. They bring important perspectives. Southeast Asia is the fastest growing region of the world right now, but with its own set of challenges and opportunities and perspectives. And by having emerging market economies like Indonesia and Thailand, having countries like Brazil, Peru and others around our table, it makes the decisions that are taken within the OECD globally more relevant and I'd like to think more impactful, and also will help us be more effective in helping to shape the global agenda on key issues. I mean, it means that Indonesia and Thailand and others will be around our table when we talk about climate change, when we talk about AI, when we talk about trade, when we talk about any other economic, social, and environmental policy issue. It means that they have their voice around our table as we are setting standards and make decisions, but it also means that our decisions collectively have a higher chance of being globally influential in taking international cooperation forward, ultimately.
Thank you. Lady over there.
Hello, my name is Johanna. I'm a second-year master's student in international governance and diplomacy. And my question touches upon the very first question that was asked, where you answered with the need, or that the OECD, for instance, provides data and narratives also to inform citizens in order to have more transparent international organizations, perhaps. But I'm still wondering, I find the OECD and the UN, it's still so abstract, even for me, having studied this for now more than 4 or 5 years. How do we reach the citizens? How do we make sure that everyone, not just political science students, actually understand the value of international cooperation? I still can't wrap my head around it, and I wonder if you have any other answers than, for instance, providing data and reports online that, to be honest, no normal people really read. Thank you.
Well, I mean, it is true that I wouldn't, I don't necessarily expect that as of tomorrow, 7, 8, 9 billion people around the world will start reading the OECD website. But by the same token, it's not the only way we try and reach people. I mean, when we, do economic surveys, or when we pursue policy analysis, whether it's through PSIA, like the program for international student assessments, or whether it is work that we do in assessing, competitiveness policy or environmental policy. I mean, we do go out into the media with specific messaging, and I mean, we do try to, I guess, get our messaging out in different channels. And we come to events like this and try to explain what we do, and hopefully you will all go home and tell 4 or 5 people what we do. And look, in the end, our number one stakeholders are the governments that we serve. But we do try through our publications and through our reports to put up a mirror that gets picked up by the media ultimately, and that it generates a level of public conversation. Sometimes issues generate a level of public conversations and people don't even know that it comes from the OECD. I mean, who here has heard of the polluter-pay principle? Well, the polluter-pay principle comes out of the OECD. Now, have you ever known that came from the OECD? Does it matter that you know? I mean, does it matter? I don't think it matters. I mean, in the end, what matters is that people accept that the polluter-pay principle is a good principle. So from my point of view, I mean, in a way, I want us to have impact and influence and get better outcomes. But, whether it is attached to the OECD in a way is secondary. The most important thing is that we can help shape policy reform and changes and improvements that deliver better outcomes for people and the planet.
Thank you. Thank you. Hopefully you've been convinced now. Lady.
Thank you. I'm Charlotte, a governance and diplomacy student. And my question was, so you talked about how we need to spread technology across, the world, and I think that's very important. However, you see that even at a time where it was humans' life were directly at stake, like during COVID, where, for example, Pfizer sued a South African company for reverse engineering the vaccine. Well, I'm just wondering, how do we tackle this issue of like property rights, and how do we concretely spread technology across the world when it's necessary?
Yeah. Well, so firstly, not everything that was done during the pandemic was right or as good as it could have been and should have been, and it's certainly true that it's important to learn the lessons of what could and should be done better next time, you know, if and when there is a next time. But let me also say, I mean, that the COVAX facility was very effective way of, through international cooperation, getting vaccines into less developed or lower income countries. No question it should have been done better, it should have been done faster, and I think, I mean, these are the sorts of conversations that have been happening through the G20 and other fora. But just because it wasn't done perfectly or as well as we would have liked in the past, doesn't mean we shouldn't aspire to do better through international cooperation next time. And let me tell you, I mean, I think that there is a real intent at a global level to do better, both when it comes to pandemic preparedness next time round, but also when it comes to the crisis or the sort of immediate response in a globally more fair and equitable way.
Thank you.
Thank you. Gentleman over there.
Hello, my name is Ashmeet, and I'm a second-year exchange student at Sciences Po. We're here to consider international cooperation today. I wonder if you think we need to expand the definition of cooperation beyond the governmental and include, say, other stakeholders such as citizens advocacy groups, corporates, I mean, individuals is a very strong word, but perhaps even individuals in the remit of international organizations at a much higher level than they currently are.
I mean, look, cooperation is a good thing at any level. Mm-hmm. Cooperation between neighbors, cooperation within a family, cooperation between countries, cooperation between governments, between businesses. I mean, wherever we can help facilitate a spirit of positive cooperation and goodwill, we should. Wherever we can bring people together to find solutions to problems, to find better ways to deal with challenges, we should. I don't think we should get too hung up on definitional issues. I mean, I think, I mean, you guys are the academic experts. I'm not a diplomatic academic expert. I think that there are actually ways to describe the different levels of international cooperation in technical terms. But I mean, if you ask me for my opinion, the answer is, you know, we should be encouraging positive people-to-people engagement and cooperation wherever we can. It can only be good.
Thank you. Gentleman over there.
Hello, Adam DePico, fellow Australian, but from Columbia University, New York. Many have argued international order and the constellation of institutions like the OECD are going through a recession, this sort of G0 power vacuum. How do we continue to build an international consensus on cooperation when we remain so fragmented and subject to the pull of this vacuum? And then a follow-up question, looking on the custodianship of values that you pointed to before, do institutions like the OECD need to course correct to avoid irrelevance? Thank you.
Well, I mean, you know, in the end, I mean, we are not an abstract organization. I mean, you know, in a way, I mean, we are, I mean, the OECD facilitates the bringing together of, like, at this stage, 38 countries from around the world, you know, from the United States and Canada down to Luxembourg and Iceland and like a lot of countries in between. The judgments and the decisions and the proposals that, you know, we make are developed and worked up by the best and brightest from across our membership. And I guess what I note is that there is a very high level of interest from non-member countries to join the organization. I mean, we've got 8 countries in the accession process now who, you know, clearly have judged that what the OECD has to offer in terms of, you know, reform through alignment with OECD standards and best practices and through participation in OECD bodies is relevant for them. If it's relevant for them, I think it is relevant. And I mean, I do think that we can continue to try and work better in coming up with better, more creative, more impactful, more globally relevant solutions as a pathfinder, as a global pathfinder. And that is part of the reason why I think it's so important for us to have countries like Indonesia, Thailand, Brazil, Argentina, and Peru join. But I mean, you know, in the end, I mean, we are not some construct that is floating in the air separately. We are a function of, you know, what collectively countries that make up the OECD bring to the table. Now, what was your? I didn't quite understand your first question.
It was just more, how do you avoid the sort of the G0 world where there's obviously a lack of governmental sort of consensus? Yeah. What more can an institution like the OECD try and do to sort of combat these prevailing sort of gravity forces? Obviously, as elucidated by Ian Bremmer.
Well, I mean, the thing is, I mean, you know, inevitably we always focus on all of those areas where there are problems and where we haven't been able collectively to work things through just yet to where they should be. But like, I mean, if you compare the world today to what the world was like 50, 60 years ago, I mean, we are, you know, in many areas, across many indicators, in a substantially better position. We're not yet where we should be or where we would want to be, and there's more progress to be made. But by the same token, I mean, you know, what is the alternative to continuing to try our best to make more progress? I mean, I don't think there is any alternative. So, I mean, even if it was, you know, we've just got to keep trying. We've got to keep trying harder. We've got to keep trying to bring people of goodwill to the table to keep the conversation going. I mean, it's not as if we can put our hands up in the air and say it's all too hard. Let's give up. Yeah.
Thank you, and we're going to take a last question because then we have to continue the show. But it is absolutely clear that, Matthias, there is a big interest in the OECD in this room. Lady over there.
Yeah, very honored to ask the last question. Thank you so much. I'm Milica. I'm a first-year student from International Governance. And I would like to describe the Paris Agreement as a magical moment in politics, where everyone agreed. And I remember that one professor at PSIA, he said, when he interviewed a former French minister, the French minister said, when we fail, we exactly know why we fail. When we succeed, we actually don't know why we succeed. And I would like to ask you if you could describe a personal or professional magical moment that you experience in politics. And on the other hand, maybe you could also share one failure with us and the mistakes that you learned from that.
Wow, if you had given me some notice of that question, I could have reflected on it, sort of off the top of my head. You know, that is maybe not. Well, let me say, for me personally, having convinced our council at the OECD to open accession discussions with Indonesia, that for me personally, that was, I felt a great level of satisfaction, because I believe that it will help deliver a good outcome for Indonesia, and I believe that it will help deliver a good outcome for the OECD, and I believe that it will deliver a good outcome in terms of what we can do together in terms of helping to shape global solutions to shared challenges. I mean, you know, I've had, you know, many failures along the way. I mean, I've been in politics over a 25-year period. You know, you win some, you lose some. And let me just say that my experience is that in many ways you probably learn more from your failures than from your successes. I mean, when you fail and you think about why and how you can avoid doing it next time when the next opportunity comes, you generally are better prepared. So from that point of view, I mean, never look at failure as something totally negative. But let me just pick up on your comment about the Paris Agreement. I mean, the Paris Agreement, no question, was a highly historic milestone and a huge achievement at the time. But in many ways, it was also only the beginning. And I mean, people knew then that the hard work and, you know, the follow-through had to happen after that. And what I said about international cooperation before has proven true in relation to that. I mean, there was great forward momentum, there is much that's good, but inevitably there's also the occasional setback and the occasional where the progress is not as effective and as swift as we would like it to be. And we've got to stay the course. It's a marathon, it's not a sprint, and we've got to, when it comes to international cooperation, it is a marathon, it's not a sprint. And I guess that is a key message. You've got to really dedicate yourself to the ultra marathon that is international cooperation on issues that are really difficult.
Thank you.
Thank you. I think Matthias deserves a big applause from all of us. And now let me give the floor to the two students that would introduce police. Over to you, ladies.
Ladies and gentlemen, dear speakers, dear dean, dear students. A strong democracy is a digital democracy, titles the New York Times regarding the role of police in political consensus in Taiwan. And now it is your turn to use it, as police will follow us throughout the entire summit. But first, let's introduce you to this tool. Police is an open source platform designed to facilitate large group collaboration and decision making. It allows you to express your views by responding to specific statements. The platform specializes in real-time opinion polling to visualize collective sentiment and identify both agreements and disagreements among you. Beyond sharing opinions, you can also propose solutions which the community votes on. Police highlights ideas with the most support and with the widest acceptance. In today's digital age, inclusive decision-making is more important than ever. Often described as a solution to traditional internet conflicts, police is a leading example of civic technology. It empowers people to actively shape policy and ensures that governance is both transparent and accountable. It doesn't just give people a voice. It helps turn public input into meaningful action. In Taiwan, police has become a central tool in V-Taiwan, a civic engagement platform that emerged in the wake of the Sunflower student movement in 2014. Protesting against the government handling a trade agreement with China. 26 national issues from digital privacy laws to government surveillance policy, artificial intelligence, and way more have been discussed on the platform. 80% of these discussions have led to concrete government action. It shows that the platform is not only symbolic, but it is also an impactful tool in shaping policy. Beyond Taiwan, the platform has been used by governments worldwide, including the United States, Canada, Singapore, the Philippines, and Spain, showcasing its contribution to democratic process worldwide. It can be the future of democracy, and it is happening now. It is happening with you. So now let's dive in on how you can concretely use this platform with Anaïs.
Thank you, Lilia. So you are all invited to actively participate in the panel discussions and keynotes by using Police. Using Police is simple. You just need to scan the QR code displayed on the slides of each session or visit the Youth and Leaders Summit website where you will find a direct link to access the platforms. Once on Police website, you can engage in two ways. First, you will be able to express your opinion by agreeing, disagreeing, or passing specific statements related to the topic being discussed over the 3 days. Second, you are invited to write your own statement by sharing ideas, values, or solutions on the issues at hand. This statement will then be visible to others who can react by voting them up if they agree or down if they disagree. To craft a strong statement, Make it short, specific, and opinion-driven. Avoid phrasing your contribution as questions, as participants won't be able to respond directly. Your input on policy is entirely anonymous, so you can share your thoughts freely and without hesitation. While police encourage open and honest opinion, we remind you, of course, to avoid hate speech or disrespectful comments. Polarized views are welcome, as they'll help us explore diverse perspectives, but mutual respect remains at the center of all contribution. And last but not least, police conversation will close on the last day of the summit, Friday 31st at 5:15. All the insights gathered will then be directly used during the closing panel by my peers with Christina Galash. If you have any question or issue regarding on how to use police, don't hesitate to ask volunteers with a red sweatshirt. We will be happy to help you. Have a great summit, enjoy it, and don't forget to use police. Thank you.